You are warm now. Your room is still. Your breath moves softly in and out, cradled by familiar air, clean sheets, the small comforts of your own world, the low hum of distant traffic, the weight of blankets pulled just right, the quiet rhythm of a nearby clock. Your pillow is dry. Their hammocks were not. You lie in a bed shaped by convenience, but once far from here. There were men and boys who rose before dawn and climbed into damp fabrics slung between beams, rocking with the creak of pine boards and the endless moan of sea swell. Their beds swayed above barrels of salted meat and lamp oil, the air never fully cleared of brine and decay. And even while they slept, the sea waited, indifferent. You are not at sea, you are not there. But once someone was, and for them there were no evenings like this, only the horizon, and above it, sky. The ship rolled, and still it rolled. And somewhere, in that unbroken water world, they vanished into routine, into quiet, hunger, salt. We begin tonight not with sails unfurled in triumph or bright cheers from the docks, but with soft footfalls on dew-slick planks. This is not a story of adventure. This is not an anthem for explorers or heroes. This is the lull of work. This is the drip of rain through canvas. This is the waiting wetness and weary bones. We think of whales now as endangered, protected, majestic, or even mythical. But there was a time when they were seen first as fuel. Their flesh was not sacred. Their blood-lit lamps. In the quiet years before electricity, whale oil burned in glass lanterns lining the boulevards of Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. It lit the halls of Europe. It allowed factories to run into night. It turned night into industry. But those who harvested this light lived mostly in darkness beneath tarpaulins, behind salt-stained rigging, within the dim wooden walls of a world always in motion. The whaling ship was less a vessel than a machine, a floating refinery where labor never stopped and silence was not peace, but exhaustion. And this journey we begin together, slowly as one that carries no certainty. There are no final victories here, no guaranteed return, only long days at sea, long nights below deck, the hollow echo of boots on wet wood, and voices gone hoarse from wind. This voyage does not shout, it waits, and it listens. And so will we. The year is 1840, or perhaps 1851, or perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is the era, the mood, the industry. From New Bedford, Nantucket, and other salt-bitten ports of New England, ships would push out into the Atlantic, rounding the Horn of South America or circling the frozen Arctic, sometimes gone for 2 years, sometimes 5. The men who signed on were young and desperate, old and broken, brave or foolish, it didn't matter. They were bodies to be used. And every journey began with the same hope, the same ritual of leaving behind. Letters home sealed with wax, handshakes, sometimes a tear, but often just a nod, and then they were gone. The docks returned to silence. The towns lived on, while at sea, somewhere beyond the curve of the world, the ship became everything, a home, a prison, a factory, an altar, and the ocean, in its enormity, accepted them without care. There were no landmarks, only waves, only wind. Back home, the ports were noisy with commerce. Carriages clattered down cobbled streets. Oil merchants haggled. Factory owners counted ledgers. And somewhere in a narrow ledger column, your name, if you were one of them, was just another line, another body out to sea. But the ship did not care about columns. The sea did not care about names. In time, the difference between Tuesday and Thursday blurred. There were no weekends, no rest, only watches, bells, orders, the scrape of knives on salt pork, the turn of the wheel, the groan of ropes. Tonight, you will not need to remember everything. There are no quizzes, no tests, no details to memorize. If you drift off, that's all right. The ship sails whether your eyes are open or closed. If your mind wanders, let it. If sleep comes, welcome it. This story does not demand your attention. It only offers its rhythm. A slow unfolding, a steady tide. The sea is patient, the ship does not rush, and neither will we. We'll begin with the sounds, the labor, the routines. Then we'll walk through a tragedy softly. A whale attack, a drifting boat, hunger but quietly. After that, we'll pause over a mystery, a ship found adrift with no one on board. And we'll end, as always, not with wreckage, but with stillness. With rooms where comfort was practiced, where silence was not from fatigue, but from choice. Where officers read books they did not finish, and china teacups rattled on polished desks while far below, the bilge water sloshed. That is the arc. That is the shape. From deck to desk, from storm to stillness. And now let the ocean open. Let the sails unfurl. Let the past begin again. Gently. The dock shrinks. The land vanishes. the sea begins. That's how it feels, not as a moment of departure, but as an unraveling of the world you knew. The ship doesn't leap into the water, it glides, creaks, sighs, and then submits to the pull of the tide, as if reluctantly leaving what is fixed for what is forever shifting. On that first morning, as the final rope is cast off and the hull pulls slightly away from the wood-planked dock, the air holds everything at once: salt and smoke, shouting and silence, hope and ache. Men yell across the deck, boots thud on oiled wood. Someone shouts a name, but the name is already being carried away by the wind. The sails snap briefly, then balloon into their full shape. The rigging moans below deck, a barrel rolls slightly out of place, a gull cries once, then again, and then the land begins to recede, gently but certainly, like something being erased. The dock shrinks, the shoreline shrinks, the buildings become toys, the steeples, just black marks. And still, the ship moves forward, slow but sure, and you, if you are on that ship, stand near the rail, one hand gripping the damp rope, the other shading your eyes, and you watch the world you knew become smaller. It's not dramatic, it's not like the stories say, it's not a grand adventure, it's quiet, it's long, it's the beginning of being gone. The shore is not just a place, it is everything. It is stillness, it is sleep, it is dry feet and regular hours, it is laughter that doesn't echo strangely, it is light that doesn't flicker like flame. And now it is behind you, now you are with the ship, and the ship is with the sea. The scent changes. At first, it's the smell of coal smoke from tugboats, of fish left too long in baskets, of dockside tar. Then it sharpens: salt, kelp, damp, canvas, oil, rope. There is always rope, the scent of rope, coarse, wet, pulled tight as everywhere, coiled beside barrels, hung from pulleys, draped like sleeping serpents. The deck is alive with motion, but also with wear. You feel the softness where boots have passed 1,000 times. You feel the ridges where salt has chewed away the finish. You look up at the sails and see stains: old storms, new patches, the mark of soot from a cook fire. Nothing here is untouched. The ship is a record of its own movement, and so, too, are its men. You pass faces, some young still with the wide eyes of land behind them, some hard, with skin cracked from years of sun and salt, their shoulders already curving to the shape of the wind. No one is smiling, there is no laughter, just work, just adjustment, just the quiet mental sorting of what is gone and what is now required. Inside the captain's quarters, a chart is unrolled, a course is traced, but out here on the main deck, only distance matters, only motion, only the fading of the familiar. The dock shrinks, the land vanishes, the sea begins. Below deck, the sounds are muffled, but constant: the creak of beams, the sigh of the water pressing against the hull, the occasional clatter of cookware not yet stowed. You descend the ladder carefully, hands sliding down the smooth wood, and find yourself in a long, dim space that smells of damp wool and boiled beans. Hammocks have been strung up, not yet claimed by habit. Barrels are secured with thick rope netting. A rat scurries along a beam and vanishes. This is home now. It is not comfortable, it is not soft, but it is consistent. It moves with the ocean's rhythm and will continue to move until something stops it. The ship groans like an old man turning in sleep. Above, you hear the cry of gulls again, but fainter now, fewer. Their chorus is thinning. As land truly disappears behind you, you climb back up. The wind has picked up a steady stream now, pushing the sails taut. The water is darker here, deeper. The foam trails longer in the wake. The horizon begins to take shape as something you will live with, an unending line. You are not alone, but it feels like it. You are not afraid, but you are uncertain. The sea has that effect. It does not intimidate like thunder or flame, it numbs. It stretches. It asks you to forget the edges of things. Time begins to loosen already. You do not remember the exact moment you last stood on the dock. Already, the sound of the port is harder to recall. Already, the ship is everything. And the ship, too, begins to forget. It stops resembling a vessel of departure and becomes a place. Not quite a home, but something close. Something repeated. You will see these sails every day. You will walk these planks in darkness and in sun. You will eat beside the same men, sleep beside the same groans of wood, wake to the same silence that is not silence at all, but movement, breath, water. The dock shrinks, the land vanishes, the sea begins. You rise before the sun, not because you are eager, but because the bell tells you to. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. That is the rhythm now. A life measured in bells, in shifts, in the quiet tolling of a brass tongue swinging in salt-thick air. The ship is never still, and neither are you, even when you sleep. Watches rotate like the stars, unmoved by feeling or fatigue. There is no special time for day or night. You might scrub the deck by moonlight or climb the rigging into dawn. There is no holiday here, no pause, only the pattern. The hierarchy on board is as rigid as the masts above you. The captain sleeps in his private cabin, maps unfurled beside polished brass instruments. Below him, the first mate shouts orders that echo like cannonballs across the open deck. Then come the second mate, the third mate, the harpooners, the boat steerers, and finally, you, the green hand. You are new. You are many things: ballast, muscle, witness. You are called upon, but not spoken to. You do not question, you do not delay. And as the sun lifts itself quietly from the sea each morning, you are already moving barefoot on damp wood, hands raw from rope, stomach growling with the familiar emptiness that salted meat will soon try to fill. Breakfast is not warm, it is not varied. You eat what is handed to you. A square of ship's biscuit, dry and dusty, broken on your knee or softened in brackish water that tastes faintly of rust and old rain. Sometimes, a strip of salted pork, so tough you chew without flavor until it gives way or you give up. Coffee, if you're lucky, is bitter and thin. There is no sugar. The hold is stacked with barrels, but none are meant for comfort. They carry provisions for survival, not pleasure. Flour, beans, pork, hardtack, molasses, and always water in great wooden casks that sweat in the heat and turn stale with time. You drink carefully, never trusting its taste, always grateful when it is not green. After the meal, the routine returns. The deck must be scrubbed. Again, always again, salt and fish guts, tar and mud. You kneel beside the others, pushing brine across the planks, scrubbing with worn brushes until your shoulders ache, until the sun warms the back of your neck and then burns it. The tar drips, the sweat stings. Someone hums a tune from nowhere, and it fades as quickly as it came. Above, sails flap and crack. A mate calls out names, numbers, instructions. You listen without looking. You climb when told. The rigging is a world of its own, high above. The wind is stronger. The rope swings beneath your feet. The view is nothing but horizon, and still, you search it for something: land, birds, the breath of a whale, but mostly, you see water, always water. The monotony is not cruel, it is simply there, like the waves, like your breath. The hours pass in repetition. Mending sails, threading needle through canvas that smells of salt and sun, patching a tear that reappears the next day, coiling ropes, checking knots, scraping barnacles, standing watch at the bow, eyes straining against the glare. You think you see something, a splash, a shape, a shadow, but it's gone, or it was never there. Time folds in on itself. Days pass like beads on a string. You do not count them. There are no weekends, no calendars. The only holiday is a storm, and even then, it is no break, it is chaos. And afterward, more of the same. Below deck, in the cramped quarters that never lose their smell of men, of mildew, of something always damp-hued, hang your shirt to dry. You rinse your face with water from a tin basin. You try not to look at yourself in the scrap of mirror nailed to the wall. Your eyes are hollowing. Your beard grows unevenly. Your hands are no longer yours. They are the ship's now, rough and stained. The hammock sways. You lie in it during your off hours, trying to sleep while others snore, while feet pass above you, while the hull groans its complaints. You learn to rest while moving. You learn to drift with open eyes. Mail from home, rare. A letter found in a passing port might take months to catch up, and when it comes, the words feel like they belong to someone else, someone not at sea, someone who has never smelled boiled whale blubber or watched the ocean stretch past reason. You fold it carefully and tuck it inside your coat. Sometimes you read it again, but less often now. It does not comfort you. It simply reminds you that land is still real. Somewhere meals come again, salted meat, beans, biscuit. You break a tooth on one, curse under your breath, and chew on the other side. It's normal now. Everything is normal now, even the strange. A fish leaps beside the boat and no one notices. A man laughs too loudly, and no one asks why. A barrel leaks. A rope frays. You patch, tie, mend. You do not ask questions, you do not make promises, you do the work. The sea doesn't ask for much, only everything, and so you give it slowly, over time, your patience, your skin, your dreams, all soaked into the boards of the ship, all lost in the spray. You learn to read the sky, to feel the shift of the wind before it announces itself. You hear the difference between a healthy creak and a worrying groan. You know which footstep belongs to which sailor, just by weight. You forget what trees smell like. You forget what silence sounds like, true silence. not the constant hush of wind and water. You forget your last name. Sometimes you are not who you were. You are crew. And crew is what the ship needs. The dock is far behind. The land is a memory. The sea is everything now. There is no soft place to sit on a whaling ship, no cushions, no upholstered chairs, no privacy behind wooden doors. The ship is a machine built for harvesting life from the sea, not for cradling the men who run it. The wood underfoot is hard, splintered, and slick with salt and fish oil. The beams above drip with condensation. The corners gather mildew. The hammocks hang low, absorbing the breath and sweat of the bodies they cradle. You sleep shoulder to shoulder, not by choice, but because space is a luxury no one is afforded. A sick man coughs beside you. Another mutters in his sleep. A third snores so loudly it feels like thunder beneath your chest. You do not complain. There is no point. The air is thick with mold and old brine. You can taste it when you breathe. In the hold, the food barrels have begun to rot. The biscuits are crumbling into powder. Weevils nest in their hearts. The salted pork leaks grease, and the brine that once preserved it now harbors its own quiet fermentation. You chew slowly, more from necessity than hunger. The flavors are dull, but the smells are sharp sour fat, spoiled grain, and always the unwashed human scent that rises from every bunk and coat and boot. Your teeth ache. You run your tongue across a molar that has gone soft at the root. There is no dentist, only a rusted set of pliers in the surgeon's box, and a prayer that the pain will stop before the tooth turns black. Your gums bleed in the morning. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and keep working. Everyone does. No one talks about their pain. There is nowhere to take it. The ship has no corners for comfort. It is one long corridor of exposure. Every creak is heard. Every cough is shared. Your skin itches constantly. Fleas, lice, mites, they make their home in the seams of your coat, in the folds of your trousers, in your bedding. You scratch without realizing. You scratch in your sleep. You scratch until the skin breaks and scabs. There are salves, but they are few, and the surgeon guards them like gold. The soap ran out weeks ago. You rinse your clothes in salt water, but they never quite dry. They stiffen, they stink. Your body becomes something separate, something functional, not familiar. You no longer think of it as yours. It is just the thing you drag across the deck, just the container that lifts rope and climbs rigging and slumps against the mast when the bell rings for change of watch. The days blur. The sky remains the same, gray-white, endless. The sea talks to itself in a constant hush, like someone mumbling a secret you can never quite hear. You try to remember what day it is. You stop. It doesn't matter. There are no Sundays here, no holidays, no end markers. Just the next task, the next bell, the next slosh of water in your boots. Letters from home are rare, and even when they arrive, they feel distant, like a memory retold by someone else. A child's drawing, a wife's careful hand, a mother's concern. You fold them, you touch them, but they do not change your surroundings. The rot remains. The smell of whale oil, though there has been no kill in weeks, clings to your pores. You can feel it behind your ears. You can taste it on your fingers. The deck is never clean, only scraped. The tools are never dry, only wiped. The pots in the galley bubble with whatever can be stewed beans, pork fat, flour mixed into a paste. The cook is quiet. He used to joke, but even that has faded. The crew eats quickly and leaves quickly. Meals are not for talking. They are for staying upright, and then you go back to your duties. You coil rope again. You stand watch again. You fix a loose nail. You patch a sail. But your hands tremble more now. Your knees feel looser. You wonder if you're thinner. You wonder if the others see it too. The captain's log is kept in tight, neat lines. You have seen it once. Each day noted by latitude, wind, sail changes, and crew health. But what about the silence? What about the slow unraveling of minds not built for monotony? A man weeps into his coat at night. Another hasn't spoken in days. A third begins to mutter to himself, turning knots in his hands long after they're finished. The boredom is not gentle. It is not quiet. It scratches. It whispers. It wears at the fabric of who you were. You begin to forget words. You begin to forget reasons. You begin to sleep with your eyes open. You dream of land, but only in brief images: a chair, a tree, the smell of bread. And then you wake, and the ship groans, and the sea rolls, and you are still in the same place you were yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. Nothing changes. Even your memories have started to rust. The oil lamps swing above you, casting shadows that seem to move slower than time. You watch the wall for hours. You try to remember how your father laughed. You cannot. The others are the same. No one sings anymore. The song stopped with the fresh water. You keep moving, but not forward. You keep breathing, but only because the ship insists on it. The only time you feel anything close to joy is when the lookout spots something on the horizon. A gull, a cloud, a sail, but it's often nothing. Just a trick of light. Just your eyes hoping for something else. The nights are no kinder, the cold settles in your bones. The hammock rocks, but not soothingly. Your back hurts, your teeth throb. You hear a rat chewing through a sack. You do not stop it. You understand its hunger. You share it. And when you finally sleep, it is not rest. It is simply the body turning off for a time. When you wake, it begins again. There comes a point, somewhere past the 50th day at sea, when the line between monotony and madness begins to blur it suddenly, not with drama, but softly, the way a tide rises unnoticed until it laps at your ankles. It begins with the silence, not the peaceful silence of solitude, but the heavy quiet of repetition, of sameness, of nothingness. The sea offers no landmarks, the sky gives no clue. Day folds into day, watch into watch. You rise, you work, you sleep. The deck creaks in the same place. The sail flaps with the same rhythm. Your boots slap the planks with the same dull thud, until even your thoughts seem to echo back at you with too much familiarity. And slowly, imperceptibly, your mind begins to slide. Some begin to talk to themselves not in fear or fervor, but because there is no one else to speak to in those early hours on the upper deck. A phrase repeated, a question murmured, a song half sung and then forgotten mid-verse. It is not strange out here. No one mocks. No one even notices. The sea is too wide, and the wind is too loud. Others begin to see things not hallucinations in the sense of madness, but trickery conjured by the water and sky. A sail where there is none. A figure in the mist. A light below the waves. These phantoms are not feared, but spoken of with a shrug, with weary eyes. Just the sea, they say. The sea plays games. And in that phrase is a quiet truth they have stopped expecting sense. A man stares at the horizon for so long he forgets what he is looking for. Another sharpens his knife every day though there is nothing to cut. Someone begins hoarding biscuits in a tin no one uses. Someone else begins speaking of a woman he hasn't seen in a decade, as if she were waiting just beyond the mast. It is not delusion. It is erosion. The slow unmaking of shape and reason. The endless waiting fills the mind with shadows. And then, as if to shake that silence apart, there comes a storm, or a hunt. Sudden, brutal, chaotic. The ropes snap, the sails whip, the water rises in sheets and crashes across the deck. Orders are shouted, men scramble. In minutes, all is noise and movement. The storm becomes a kind of punctuation, a violent reminder that the world still turns, that death is not distant, or the call comes from above. Tar she blows, and suddenly, all hands are awake, rowing, shouting. The boat cutting through the sea, toward a leviathan. The ocean boils around them. Harpoons fly. Blood churns the water. The scent of whale breath, warm and grotesque, fills their noses. And then it is over. The body drags. The blood settles. The meat is processed. And the silence returns. But it returns heavier now, thickened with fatigue. The storm leaves dampness. The hunt leaves bruises. And so they settle back into routine, but with slightly more wear. A man begins to forget his own reflection. He shaves without looking. He avoids mirrors, though they are rare. Others forget why they came at all. The money they sought seems abstract. The land they left, a dream. The letters from home sit unopened in their trunks. The ink has faded. The handwriting is strange. And yet, they read them, again and again. Not for the words, but for the shape of them, for the memory of holding something not soaked in salt. Time no longer passes. It folds. Days bend around each other. A week becomes a whisper, a month, a rumor. Men drift not only through space, but through themselves. Laughter still comes, but it is quieter now. Jokes are retold with no punchlines. Games are played with no rules. The cards are soft from use, the dice, smoothed down. The captain keeps his log with precision, but he too speaks more softly now. The mates pace the deck, eyes clouded. Even the youngest boy, once quick and bright, sits longer at meals, chewing slowly, not because the food is hard, but because there is nothing else to do. They are not broken, these men. They are weathered like the ship, like the sails, like the bones in their hands. Their emotions no longer spike. Fear is low and constant. Hope is distant and quiet. Anger flickers, then fades. There is no room for rage. Only routine, only survival. When they cry, it is brief. When they sing, it is tuneless. When they sleep, they do not dream. They forget the names of flowers, the sound of leaves in wind, the feel of grass beneath bare feet. Some speak of it, most do not. It is enough to breathe, enough to wake, enough to make the passing days by the thickening calluses on their palms. And when a whale is spotted again, and the boats are lowered, they move without urgency, not because they are slow, but because there is no novelty. Death comes as easily as sleep, and in some quiet place within them, both are welcomed equally. The sea has become their world, the stars, their ceiling, the pitch and roll of the deck, their only rhythm, and all the while the ocean speaks in waves and sighs and salt. It does not offer comfort, it does not offer cruelty, it only endures, and so do they. And still, the sea breathes. Long after the laughter fades, long after the latter's yellow and the names become echoes only a few remember, the ocean continues. The wind shifts, the salt stiffens the lines. The stars turn slowly above the endless dark. Somewhere in that expanse, among currents not drawn on any chart, there was once a ship that did not wait, a ship that was not lost to time quietly, but shattered into memory. Before Melville wrote fiction, before Ishmael watched the white whale breach, there was something real, a vessel, a crew, a story so quietly horrific it would one day inspire a novel and yet remain quieter than any fiction. It was not carved from myth, it was carved from fear and hunger and the long shadow of a tale that rose once from the deep and did not vanish. This was not a hunt, it was not even a storm, it was a singular event, a breach, a strike, a splintering hull, a sinking, and after that adrift in boats too small for hope, beneath a sun too large for forgiveness. But before the wreck, there was the ship, there was the Essex. She left Nantucket in the year 1819, strong and swift, built for a 2.5-year voyage that was meant to end in profit and return. Like so many others, the men who boarded her were not unlike the ones you've already met, young, weather-worn, familiar with tedium and toil. They left their families at the docks, they shook the hands of boys they'd never see again, and they set sail into the wide blue, chasing whales, not for glory, but for barrels of oil to light lamps in Boston, to grease machinery in Liverpool, to burn in the chandeliers of Paris salons. But the Essex would not complete her journey. Her bones would not return to Nantucket. Her logs would be written in water, and her tale would pass not through charts and maps, but through trembling recollections, whispered decades later by those who lived in it because they were brave, but because they were not the first to die. And so we begin again, a new voyage, a different kind of silence, one broken by impact, one marked by drift, one that begins, not with departure but with a tale that rose, a tale that fell, a tale that changed everything. You are lying still now, perhaps with the hum of your home faint in the background, the quiet tick of a clock, the sigh of your bedding as it adjusts to your shape. There is no wind in your room, no scent of fish or brine, only comfort, only stillness. But long ago, in a harbor edged with worn wooden pilings and sails tugging at their ropes, the town of Nantucket stirred beneath a pale morning sky. Boots echoed on planks, slick with dew. A gull cried overhead, not a shriek, but a tired, rasping call that blended with the muted thump of barrels being rolled and ropes coiled with practiced ease. The streets nearby were not paved in stone, but in footsteps. Women with shawls pulled tight stood quietly at the dockside, eyes on the ships rather than each other. Children did not shout, they whispered, as if the sea itself might hear. One such ship, the Essex, was readying for departure. She was not grand, she was not clean. Her hull was worn from previous voyages, her timbers groaning slightly as the crew adjusted her rigging for the open Atlantic. She had sailed before, she would sail again, or so they believed. The Essex was built for one purpose only, whaling, not trade, not war, not passage. She was a floating factory, an engine of extraction, bound not for adventure but for labor. And the men who climbed aboard her on that quiet August morning in 1819 were not dreamers or heroes, but workers, some barely more than boys. Their bags were light, their expectations lighter still. The air smelled of tar, of tobacco from a pipe left lit near a pile of rope, of seawater crusting along the hull. Some of the men turned once to look at shore, at wives, at buildings, at dogs that did not know they would be missed. Most did not. The dock grew smaller as the tide took hold, as the sails rose and caught the wind like tired lungs exhaling at last. The harbor shrank, the land blurred, and the sea began. Days at sea blend, even from the first. Aboard the Essex, the initial weeks passed with motion, with rhythm. The crew woke early and turned to their posts without song, without command. The sails had to be trimmed, the decks scrubbed, the rigging checked and rechecked. Salt built up along the lines and had to be scraped away. The work was not hard, exactly, but it never stopped. The sun rose. The sails shifted. Meals were ladled into wooden bowls, salted pork, dry biscuit, water from barrels already tinged with a strange, sour edge. And then the sun sank again. The men learned one another by degrees. There was Captain George Palladiang for command, quiet and cautious. His voice did not rise above the wind. He believed in discipline, but not severity. His first mate, Owen Chase, was different, more decisive, more outspoken, respected for his skill with tools and storm sense alike. There was also the second mate, Matthew Joy, whose name betrayed the weariness behind his eyes. The rest of the crew, green hands and seasoned sailors, kept to their ranks. They shared hammocks, meals, tasks, but not much else. There were songs, on calm evenings, not shanties of celebration, but work songs, rhythmic, slow, like the creak of wood and the lap of water. On such nights, the men leaned against the bulwark, watching the stars shift like salt spilled across dark cloth. They did not speak of home, they rarely spoke of whales, but always, in the background of the quiet, was the purpose. To hunt. When a whale was spotted, first a spout, distant and brief, the ship changed. The boats were lowered, fast but silently. Men took their places, harpoons were checked, lines coiled. The chase began with long rows. Arms ached quickly, but no one stopped. The water hissed along the boat's sides. The whale, moving faster than seemed possible, would rise again, another spout, another bearing. They followed. Once close, the harpooner stood. Balance mattered, timing mattered more. And then, with a sound like breath sucked through clenched teeth, the harpoon was thrown. It struck, and the sea erupted. The whale did not die, not immediately. The line attached to the harpoon ran fast, dragging the boat in a sudden race the men did not control. The rope burned. The oars lifted from the water. For hours, sometimes the whale pulled them through the sea, bleeding, exhausted, but refusing surrender. Eventually, days, sometimes it would die. The carcass was towed slowly back to the Essex. Then began the processing. Men carved into the whale from floating platforms, slicing thick strips of blubber which were hauled aboard and rendered in large pots over open fires. The smell was overwhelming, thick, oily, sweet and rancid at once. It coated everything, even dreams. The oil was collected in barrels stored below deck. It would one day light lamps in far-off cities, Boston, London, Philadelphia. But for now, it sat in the hold, sloshing gently with each wave. The crew resumed their work, scrubbing, patching sails, fishing, waiting. Months passed. The Essex moved through the Atlantic, around Cape Horn, into the Pacific. There were few ports, little fresh food, no letters. The crew grew thinner, browner, quieter. They stopped asking questions they had once cared about. They watched the horizon, and the clouds, and the moods of one another. They did not know what would come. But they were no longer on land, and the sea-wide, ancient, and indifferent, did not care who they were or why they had come. And so, as they drifted farther from home, the men of the Essex became part of a story they could not yet see. Not tragedy, not yet, only routine, only slow, steady motion, only the vast, endless deep beneath their feet, and the slow pull of something enormous, waiting just beneath the waves. The morning had begun as so many others had across the weeks and months that had drifted into one another like clouds in a low sky, without fanfare, without promise, only with the soft repetition of motion, the slap of rope against damp mast, the creak of swollen wood, shifting gently in the swell, the distant arrhythmic footfalls of boots on a deck darkened by salt and use. The air was heavy but not hostile, the wind neither eager nor withdrawn. It came in long, low exhales across the water, ruffling the topmost threads of the waves like a mother smoothing a child's hair. The sea was unusually still, not flat, but quieter, hush rather than a lull, as though something unseen was pressing a finger to its lips. There was no sun to speak of, only a diffused soft light that made no shadows, offered no warmth, and told no time. The men aboard the Essex moved with the choreographed boredom of habit, coiling lines, wiping blades, tightening what was already taut, because that is what one did when the sky held its breath. Far off, perhaps a mile or two, a small ridge of foam appeared and disappeared again, and only a few among them noticed. Not unusual, not enough to draw attention. The ocean was full of vanishing things, and so they went on, elbows deep in resin, boots trailing salt, voices low and scattered like stones in a tide pool, until it returned, the ridge again, closer now and larger. Still they said nothing, not out of fear, but because there was not yet anything to name. The water changed in tone, in texture, a subtle shift like silk brushing against canvas, and they began to look outward. The shape came clearer. Not a vessel. Not a trick of light. It rose and curved, sleek and massive, the color of aged slate. A whale, yes, but not just any, not one of those sluggish giants that gave themselves up after a chase. This one did not run. It watched, it circled, and it stayed near the surface, pacing around the ship in arcs too perfect, too conscious to dismiss. No blowhole spouted, no tail slapped, just the low slice of its back cutting the water, the faintest shimmer of foam trailing behind it. The men had seen whales dozens, perhaps hundreds, but this was different. They felt it in their bones, not in their eyes. The ship slowed, though no one ordered it. Voices dropped to a hush. Hands stilled. Even the sails, catching nothing now, drooped as though uncertain. And then, without signal, without warning, the whale turned. A long slow pivot of mass and muscle, the sea around it dimpling like cloth pressed under a stone. It moved toward the ship, not fast, not erratically, but with the inevitability of gravity, like a pendulum beginning its arc. Some men stepped back, others stepped forward, but none knew what to do, because there was nothing in the books, nothing in the law, that told you how to meet a whale that did not flee. It came on, closer, closer still, then impact. The sound was not what they expected, not a crash, not a scream, but a hollow, wet crack, like ice breaking underfoot, like timber snapping in a storm, only muted by the water that held it. Then silence, an awful, open silence. No shouts, no splashes, just disbelief held like breath. The hull of the Essex lurched sideways, the deck tilting by degrees, sending tools rolling, boots stumbling, ropes unraveling. Men clutched beams or froze mid-step, and then the whale vanished. Beneath the surface, without a trace, it slipped below as if it had never been, leaving only foam and trembling wood in its wake. For a moment, they thought it was done. A warning, perhaps, a mistake, an end to whatever curiosity had compelled it. But the sea gave no such comforts. It returned, this time from a distance, a dark mass streaking toward them like a question that already knew its answer. The second strike came harder. Not just a break but a breach, the full weight of the whale's head slamming into the bow, splintering timbers like dry twigs, sending a groan through the ship that sounded too human, too final. A mast cracked near its base, water rushed in, the deck split slightly underfoot, and still no screams, only the sounds of things losing shape, the crackle of wood, the gurgle of rising water, the moan of iron nails pulling free. The whale disappeared again, and it did not return. It had never been anger, never been malice, only mass, only momentum. The men stood soaked in disbelief, hands slack, eyes wide not with terror, but with the slow onset of realization. The Essex was dying, not all at once, but with certainty. It would not sail again. Some rushed below deck to salvage tools. Others began lowering the small boat's fragile, open things not meant for oceans, but for chasing whales already wounded. The ship groaned beneath them, sagging forward like a lung exhaling its last. The captain, George Pollard, stood silent. First mate Owen Chase later recalled that the ship trembled as if alive, as if it too had realized it would not see shore again. There were no goodbyes to the Essex, only a stepping away from wood to water. And as the men pulled away in lifeboats that looked absurdly small against the waves, the wind returned, a little stronger, as if to erase the stillness that had come before. The sea resumed its rhythm. The world did not notice what had happened, and far below, perhaps, the whale swam on, unbothered, unaware, perhaps not. But what mattered now was not the why, only the after, the drifting, the hunger, the silence that would follow. When the Essex slipped beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean in November of 1820, she left behind more than broken timbers. She left 20 men afloat on 3 small whaleboats scattered across an ocean that had no interest in memory. There had been no time for farewells, no last ceremony, only the hurried scraping together of what could be lifted, passed down, held steady. From the dying ship they salvaged little, some casks of hardtack already softened by the salt air and tinged with weevils, a few barrels of fresh water, some already tainted, some cracked and weeping slowly into the bottom of the boats, navigational instruments wrapped in oilskins and prayers, a musket or two soaked in seawater, their powder nearly useless, and they had themselves sunburned, blistered, frightened not with panic but with that slow-moving dread that does not rise up but sinks in. The boats were not made for this. They were for the chase, not the crossing. Built to dart after prey, not to drift endlessly. They were open to the sky and the sea alike. Still, they pushed off from the wreck with the stunned determination of those who have not yet had time to mourn. The plan was not a plan, not really. They feared the islands closest to them, rumors of cannibals, of savages who would not recognize them as anything but intruders. So instead of heading west toward safety, they turned east toward the coast of South America. It would take them thousands of miles. They had no mast, no sail, only makeshift coverings and muscle. They tied the 3 boats together at first, a fragile flotilla drifting across the blue. But as days passed, as wind and wave began to assert their own logic, the boats parted, first slowly, then completely, no cries, no shouts, just the line unfastening, the ocean deciding. And then each boat was alone. The rhythm began, the sun rose, the sun set. They did not know what day it was. The men sat, cradled in the narrow bellies of their boats, shifting weight carefully, keeping their balance even as their strength drained away. The salt crusted on their lips, their tongues swelled, their thoughts blurred. There was no conversation, not anymore, only murmurs, the occasional gasp, the soft sound of water lapping against wood. They rationed at first. A biscuit broken into quarters, a spoonful of water passed from hand to cracked hand. But the body knows more than the mind, and soon the rations went faster than they should have. Some men clutched journals, trying to record what they saw. Others watched the horizon day after day, not with hope but with habit. When rain came, it was a miracle. When it didn't, they waited anyway. Skin peeled, eyes burned, muscles shrank. One night someone did not wake. They did not speak of it. They only moved aside. The sky remained blue, the water remained vast, and inside the boats, the men remained quiet. Some tried to pray, some could not remember how. Others spoke to themselves, mouths moving with no sound. Their clothes no longer fit, their cheeks hollowed. There were arguments, sometimes, about the stars, about the wind, about whether they had already passed some invisible line between rescue and ruin. But mostly, there was silence. A silence that grew not from calm, but from depletion. The sun rose. The sun set. They drifted. Whales passed, distant and uninterested. Birds circled once, then vanished. One man, delirious, dove overboard, convinced he saw land. He did not return. The others watched the spot where he had gone down, then turned their eyes back to the blank horizon. Time slowed. The flesh remembered more than the mind. And still, the boats moved, not toward anything, but away from certainty, from order, from land. The bodies in the boats grew fewer. The water in the casks ran low. There was talk, eventually, of other things, of using what they had left. But not yet. Not quite yet. The sun rose, the sun set, and still, they drifted. There comes a moment, on the open sea, when the mind no longer tracks the passing of time by days or hours, but by thirst, by the dull ache of hunger that has moved beyond urgency and into something quieter, something still and constant, like the creak of the boat or the burn of salt in cracked lips. In the drifting boats that once belonged to the crew of the Essex, that moment came slowly, without ceremony, as all the most difficult moments do. One man did not wake. There was no panic, no attempt at revival, only the shifting of bodies, the soft clatter of bones against wood as the crew made room, as eyes did not meet and words were not said. They did not bury their dead at sea, not because they lacked reverence, but because they could not afford to. The ocean is vast, but hunger is vaster, and so, they used what remained, not with savagery, not with celebration, but with the quiet obedience of those who wished to see one more sunrise, one more shadow pass across the edge of their world. There are accounts in public, others whispered in journals that describe it. Owen Chase, the first mate, would write about it later, with restraint, with hesitation, as though the act could still weigh down the page even decades removed. He did not linger on it. He did not name names. And yet the truth sits there between his words, in the spaces between sentences, that there was no decision, only silence, and a shared, unspoken understanding. The men who remained did not look at what they held. They did not speak of where it came from. They prepared it over coals when possible, letting the smoke rise and carry the memory away. The sea accepted it, the sky too. No judgment came from the waves. In the vast quiet of the Pacific, morality did not echo, it simply dissolved. And when there was nothing else, they turned inward. What do you remember, when there is nothing left to forget? What part of yourself is preserved, when survival means letting go of all the rest? There are records that note the drawing of lots, a ritual that has no winner, only the illusion of choice. Someone draws the short straw, someone looks away, and when it is done, no one speaks. That man's name is written down, but only faintly. For those who made it back, the memory clung to a shame, perhaps, but as a shape that could not be set aside. When they reached land, Some tried to explain, others never did. There is no monument to those lost to hunger in the boats of the Essex. Only journals, only shadows, only questions passed from historian to historian. What would I have done? How do you measure life when measured against another? These were not criminals, they were not monsters, they were cold, they were empty. They endured, and in the end, they were found, starved, skeletal, blinking against the sunlight like men who had not seen color in months. Some would live many more years, others would be haunted, but none were ever quite the same. The sea had taken more than their ship, it had taken certainty, and what remained was quiet and pale and unspeakable, and yet they carried it forward, as all survivors do, because that is what it means to outlive a tragedy. You carry its silence. They returned quietly, hollowed by hunger, their silence deeper than the sea they crossed. The few survivors of the Essex, gaunt and sunburnt, were lifted from their boats not in triumph, but in near-collapsed skeletal men whose eyes held the kind of stillness that cannot be explained, only carried. Their feet, when they touched land again, did not rush to embrace the soil. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if unsure it was real. Clothing hung from them in tatters. Hair had grown wild and matted. Some were barely more than breath and bone. Their rescue was not followed by celebration, but by the quiet work of care baths, broth, blankets, silence. Questions were asked softly, answers given more softly still, if given at all. They did not speak of all they had done, not yet. Some never did. And when they made their way back to Nantucket, their island home did not meet them with parades or cheers, but with tentative steps, hushed whispers, and the worried faces of those who had already imagined their graves. The reintegration was slow. Familiar faces had become unfamiliar, familiar habits broken. They had to relearn comfort. Some never quite did. The dreams returned each night, of water that gave no relief, of eyes that begged without sound. They woke, not with screams, but with the quiet knowledge that they were still alive, and that this, too, was a kind of burden. Among them was First Mate Owen Chase, who eventually put to paper what had happened delicately, deliberately, as one might handle something still burning. His memoir, matter of fact and restrained, nonetheless hinted at the moral fog they had sailed through. It told of the whale, yes, and of the sea's cruelty, but it also told of something else, a silence that fell over men when survival became something shameful, when life came at the cost of things unspoken. Years later, that same account found its way into the hands of Herman Melville. The younger man read it not as fable, but as fact found within its pages, not a hero's arc, but a deep, unrelenting hum of unease. From Chase's account, Melville began to shape his own Leviathan, giving rise to the white whale that would haunt his pages. But Melville's whale was not the one that Essex met. His whale was myth, vast and colorless, embodying the unknowable, the uncontrollable, the indifferent force of nature and obsession alike. The real whale was no symbol, it was a creature of mass and muscle, scarred by prior encounters, perhaps already hunted, already wronged. There was no metaphor when it rammed at the Essex, no allegory, just the sound of timber splintering, of men crying out, of sea rushing in. But myth has its uses. It allows us to look at horror sideways, to clothe it in fiction, to retell it until it feels manageable. And so the whale that truly struck was slowly replaced in memory by the whale that never was, a white beast, singular and sinister, born not in the ocean but in the troubled thoughts of men trying to understand the void they had looked into. Yet Chase's truth remained, even as fiction overtook it. It lived on in margins and footnotes, in the uneasy edge of Melville's story, in the pause between sentences. The Essex was not forgotten, but it was softened, abstracted, and perhaps that was mercy. Because the men of the Essex had not asked to become legend. They had not sought narrative, they had only sought to live, and they had done so at a cost they never wanted to count. The legacy they left behind was not only in books, but in questions about endurance, about moral limits, about the line between survival and surrender. Their story asks, in quiet tones, what will you do when there is nothing left? And when you return, who will you be? These are not questions with answers. They are questions with echoes. And the sea, it seems, is made of echoes. Of wood that once floated, of names once spoken, of cries lost to wind. You, listening now, are not adrift. You are not parched or stunned. You are here, safe and still. But once, someone was not. Once, someone watched the sun set on the open water and did not know if it would rise again. Once, someone held a piece of hardtack between trembling fingers and wondered if it would be their last. And once, someone chose silence not to deceive, but because there was no longer anything to say. We remember them not because they were noble, or brave, or even right. We remember them because they were human, caught in the machinery of nature, circumstance, and choice. And through their story, refracted in literature and remembered in fragments, we glimpse a kind of truth. That survival is not always victory. That memory is not always mercy. And that the sea vast and ever-moving does not remember names. But it remembers salt. It remembers wood. It remembers silence. And so, too, shall we. There are mysteries that arrive with violence, with fire, with cannon, with thunder and wreck, but this is not that kind of story. This is the story of silence, of drift, of a ship that did not sink, did not burn, did not break apart in storm or scream, but simply floated, emptied of its people, and full of questions. You are not there, you are not adrift, you are not listening to the creak of the hull in the open sea. But once, someone was, or many someones, or none. The wind is soft, the water calm, the sky above is pale and wide, and somewhere between Portugal and the Azores, a vessel slides across the waves as though pushed by breath, not force. It does not list, it does not signal. Its sails are partly set but torn, as though no hand has pulled them taut in days. There are no cries from the deck, no laughter, no commands shouted down from the rigging. There is only the soft moan of wind, the ripple of cloth, and the distant slosh of the sea against wood. The year is 1872, and the ship is the brigantine Mary Celeste. It will become a name spoken often, turned into pulp novels and tabloid legend, wrapped in fog and whispered across generations. But in this moment before the headlines, before the speculation, it is only a vessel with no answers and no crew in sight. They had not died, for there were no bodies. They had not sent word, for the ship's log stopped without alarm. They had not abandoned ship in panic, for the cargo was mostly intact, untouched, and their personal belongings remained in place. Pipes, journals, oilskins, a child's toys, a sewing machine, its thread still wound. No storm had marked the hull, no fire had scorched the beams. There was no blood, only absence. There was no storm, only drift. The Dei Gratia, another merchant ship, was the first to spot her moving slowly, oddly, like a sleepwalker at sea. Captain Morehouse, having known the Mary Celeste's own captain, Benjamin Briggs, found the sight of her unnerving. She moved without purpose, sails ragged, as if someone had left her and when men boarded her they found what would unsettle seafarers for a century to come. Everything in place but the people. The ship was seaworthy. The galley was stocked. 6 months of food and fresh water remained. The cargo barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Genoa was largely intact. But the lifeboat was missing, and so were all 10 people who had departed New York with the Mary Celeste just weeks earlier. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 trusted crew. The hatch was open. A pump had been dismantled, but there were no signs of fire, of panic, or of haste. The last log entry, dated 10 days prior, was routine. No farewell, no fear, just a coordinate and a mention of mild seas. It was as if a whisper had passed through the vessel and carried the crew away, but not their clothing, not their meals, not their quiet daily life, which seemed paused, not ended. The image lingered in the minds of sailors, because it contradicted every rule of the sea. When something goes wrong, there is noise, there is signal, there is response. But here there was nothing, no mayday, no flares, no debris, no explanation, just a floating home, empty and waiting. Imagine for a moment boarding such a ship, the floor damped beneath your boots, the air inside the captain's quarters still faintly scented with ink and brass polish, a journal half-written, a coffee cup stained and dry, a child's small boots beside a trunk, but no child. You look to the sea, as though it might speak. But the waves keep their secrets. The sun rises, the sun sets, the ship sways. There is no answer. The crew of the Dei Gratia brought her in, claimed salvage rights, and told the story. Newspapers took that story and grew it. Ghosts, sea monsters, mutiny, alien abduction. One theory said the alcohol had leaked, causing toxic fumes and a panic, but the barrels were mostly full. Another theory claimed pirates, but nothing was taken. Some imagined Captain Briggs going mad, others imagined the crew fleeing some unseen threat, but always, the sea stayed quiet, and so, even now, we wonder, but not loudly. The mystery of the Mary Celeste does not shout, it does not rage, it asks, quietly, and perhaps that is why it lingers, because the world is full of storms and wrecks, but rare is the mystery that speaks only in silence. You are not there, but once, someone was. They climbed aboard. They ate, they wrote, they sailed, and then, they left. The sea does not explain, it only carries wood and salt and silence. And in that silence our minds drift, not toward horror, but toward the human. What would cause a man to step into a lifeboat in calm seas? What fear rises without storm? What moment passes without record? This is not a crime scene, this is a question, and as the ship floats onward, long after its crew has vanished, that question floats too. You do not need to answer it. You do not need to believe the theories or follow the trails. You need only drift here for a while with the wind, with the quiet, with the empty deck of a ship whose name is remembered not for tragedy but for absence. You are warm, you are safe, you are not at sea. But once, someone was. Before the silence, before the absence, before the mystery floated its way into maritime legend, there was a ship, and it was not yet infamous. It was simply a vessel with a job, a name, and a past, as all ships have. Once it had been called something else, a name that sounded bold and unyielding, a name it bore through minor mishaps and slow voyages. It was Canadian-built in Nova Scotia in the year 1861, made of sturdy timber and crafted with hands that knew the sea. For over a decade, it sailed the Atlantic under that first name, carrying cargo, enduring storms, running aground more than once, but always repaired, always relaunched. There was nothing particularly cursed about her past, only the kind of incidents that followed any wooden ship of that era: some fire, some damage, a captain who died aboard, but not mysteriously, only from pneumonia. A ship's life, like a person's, collects scars. And then, in 1869, the ship was sold, refitted, and renamed. The Amazon became the Mary Celeste, and with new ownership came new purpose. She was not a grand vessel, but a practical one just over 100 feet long, a two-masted brigantine made to carry goods across the open sea. Her sails, when full, made her look elegant but not extravagant. Her decks were scrubbed clean with seawater and sand. Her beams groaned softly when she moved through high swells. The brass on her compass mount caught the sunlight. The ropes were tarred and tacky to the touch, the sails thick and off-white with salt. Below deck, the smell was of oak, oil, and the faint trace of smoke from the galley stove. She was not glamorous, but she was alive in the way that ships are alive, not breathing, but moving, creaking, responding, asking for care and offering passage. In late 1872, she was readying again. Her cargo was to be 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, bound for Genoa. The voyage would take her from New York across the Atlantic, and her captain was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a seasoned sailor, a deeply religious man, and by all accounts, prudent and respectable. He had invested in the ship himself and took this voyage seriously. But he was not alone. With him, his wife Sarah had chosen to accompany him on this journey, something she did not always do, and their young daughter Sophia, just 2 years old, was also aboard. They had left behind their older son with relatives, and so the family set out as a small, hopeful unit, bound for Europe on a commercial run. It was, in many ways, an ordinary thing. This was not a whaling expedition, not a colonization voyage, not an exploration. It was a merchant run, scheduled, timed, expected. Alongside the Briggs family were a crew of 7 trustworthy, experienced sailors selected by the captain himself. Among them was the first mate, Albert Richardson, known for his skill and composure, the cook, Edward Head, and for German seamen, steady hands with good reputations. There were no omens, no signs, only plans. The voyage began like any other. On November 5, 1872, the Mary Celeste departed Pier 50 on the East River of New York City. The weather was not dramatic. The sea was not angry. The ship moved slowly past the bustling harbor, the sound of gulls fading behind, and the long, low roll of the Atlantic swelling ahead. Below deck, stores were packed: hardtack, salted meats, fresh water, biscuits. The galley was small but functional, and the cook began his routines: boiling water, portioning supplies, tending to the simple needs of those who lived by tide and sky. Above deck, Captain Briggs paced, checked his charts, noted the wind. He was not a man prone to superstition, nor one to indulge in theatrical behavior. His log entries were spare, factual: bearings, weather, position, the sort of notes meant for navigation, not narrative. His cabin was neat. A Bible rested on a shelf. Sophia's small boots were kept clean, tucked beneath a bench. Sarah moved quietly between quarters, keeping her daughter occupied, helping in small ways, preserving a rhythm of domestic life even at sea. Life aboard the Mary Celeste was neither luxurious nor cruel. It was measured. Watches were kept in 4-hour rotations. Sailors slept in narrow berths, rose to scrub the decks with seawater. adjusted sails, checked rigging. Meals were eaten together when weather allowed. Prayers were said. The child laughed now and then, and the crew, hardened by years at sea, softened briefly in her presence. Days passed in this way. The ship moved. The sun rose. The sun set. There were no arguments, no strange reports, no illness recorded. Only wind, waves, and work. They trimmed sails. They adjusted heading. They watched the weather. They moved forward. Captain Briggs's last log entry, dated November 25th, placed the Mary Celeste near the Azores. The seas were calm, the wind mild. The position noted. There was no mention of trouble, no mention of sickness, no cryptic remarks. The voyage continued, and then, it did not. When the Mary Celeste was found in early December by the Dei Gratia, she was drifting. The sails were partially set, but in poor condition. The lifeboat was gone, but inside life seemed paused, not ended. The cook's utensils were clean and stored. The galley was in order. The logbook remained. Sarah's sewing machine was still lashed in place. The child's toys were untouched. There were no signs of fire, of storm damage, of violent struggle. Charts remained in the captain's quarters. There were no torn pages, no frantic messages, just a ship, alone. The people were gone, but the ship had not been abandoned in haste. The cargo was untouched. 6 months of provisions remained. Their personal effects had not been packed, and so the ship and its people became a question. But before they became ghosts, they were real. They were not mysterious. They were not cursed. They were ordinary. They ate. They prayed. They worked. They measured the stars. They counted their bearings. They sailed. There were no omens, no signs, only plans. And one day, those plans were undone, not with thunder, not with fire, but with stillness. And in that stillness, the world imagined monsters. But perhaps the greater mystery is that there was no sign at all, only the soft creak of wood, the whisper of a rope, the missing sound of a footstep that would never come again. The morning of December 5, 1872, unfolded as many did on the open Atlantic, wind steady, skies watchful, water curling in long, loping swells. But on the horizon that morning, the crew of the brigantine Dei Gratia spotted something that was not sky, not wave, not whale, a ship, small against the horizon, but not moving with purpose. Its sails looked wrong, not neatly squared to the wind, but loose, slumping, as if the rigging were tired. The vessel rocked, not with the muscular thrust of forward motion, but with the passive, uneasy rhythm of abandonment. The men aboard the Dei Gratia, seasoned, sharp, familiar with the ways of ships that had lost their course, watched. The ship was not drifting fast, not sinking, not burning. There were no signals, no colors raised in distress, just canvas flapping lazily, masts standing quiet, and the vessel's bow swinging gently with the current. It was as if it were waiting. The closer they drew, the more certain they became. Something was wrong. No one came to the rail to wave. No figure emerged to hail them. No one moved at all. Captain David Morehouse, a man both cautious and capable, ordered a small boarding party to set out. The ocean lapped softly against the rowboat as it approached. The sound of oars dipping and pulling was the only rhythm, and when they reached the hull of the ship, they paused, not for fear, but for the weight of knowing. Ships at sea are not empty by accident, and yet, this one seemed simply unattended. They called out. No answer. The ship bore the name Mary Celeste, faintly painted on the stern. One by one they climbed aboard, boots creaking on damp wood. The decks were slippery with dew and salt. The sails were not torn, only loose. The rigging was intact. The wheel stood still, untended. And then, they began to move through the ship, not in haste, but in that careful, deliberate way that men do when walking into someone else's absence. Forward to aft, door to door, locker to locker. The cabins were still arranged, not ravaged, not in disorder, just, unclaimed. The cook's galley had pots and utensils stored away. The stove was cold, but not empty. A kettle had sat too long. In the captain's quarters, a logbook rested neatly, entries recorded up to November 25th, 10 days before. Not urgent, not cryptic, just weather, position, ordinary. On a small bench, someone had folded a child's dress. Nearby, a doll handmaid, soft, well-worn, sat untouched. It was not that things were wrong, it was that everything was too right to still. In the storeroom, the barrels of alcohol were largely untouched. Supplies were plentiful. Water casks remained sealed. There had been no rush to abandon, no last-minute gathering of goods. Personal items were left behind, boots, jackets, trinkets, hairbrushes. The lifeboat was missing, but that was the only absence of equipment. The charts in the navigation room were in place. The clock had stopped. The sextant was stored. On the dining table, cups remained. Not tipped, not broken, just waiting. The more the boarding crew searched, the more they found. Nothing, not a drop of blood, not a scratch of violence, not even the mark of a hurried exit. The ropes on the side, where a lifeboat may have been lowered, were cut clean, intentional. But there were no signs of panic, no broken rail, no flares, no damage to the hull. The Mary Celeste had not been struck by storm. She had not been overrun. The ship was not leaking, not foundering. She was sound. Her sails were disheveled from neglect, not distress. The crew's clothing remained, their money, their instruments, all but their presence. The ship had become a question, and the sea had offered no answer. The men from the Dei Gratia remained aboard only long enough to assess that the vessel could be towed. Slowly, carefully, they split their resources, some remaining on their own ship, some staying aboard the Mary Celeste, and began the long, deliberate process of bringing the abandoned brig to Gibraltar. In the coming weeks there would be inquiries, legal investigations, speculations about piracy, mutiny, insurance fraud, but none of these answers would sit comfortably. The weather, in the days following November 25th, had not been severe. There were no reports of storms, no sudden gales. The most generous hypothesis was that Captain Briggs, concerned about fumes from the alcohol below deck, may have ordered a temporary evacuation in the lifeboat, intending to return. But if so, why take the entire crew, including his wife and child? Why leave the ship under sail, moving slowly, unattended? And if they intended to return, why did they not? The lifeboat, like its passengers, was never found. No distress messages were recovered. No later sightings emerged. The Mary Celeste had simply been at sea, and then she had been alone. The silence of her decks was louder than any cannon blast. And in time, the silence became legend. But it is worth remembering, before she was a ghost ship, she was a working vessel. Before she was mystery, she was mundane. Before she was an enigma, she was a home, a floating space where meals were cooked, where prayers were said, where a child laughed. The question of what happened matters less than the awareness of who they were. People, not symbols. Crew, not specters. And as the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar with her sails slowly trimmed by men who were not her own, the world turned its eyes not to tragedy but to puzzle. This was not like the Essex, where blood and storm carved stories into the sea. This was a story where the ending was erased. A pause with no resumption, a lull that never broke. And in that space between what was and what should have followed, curiosity bloomed. But even curiosity is a kind of noise. And on the Mary Celeste, there was no noise, only waiting. Only the echo of footsteps that no longer fell. And so the logs were examined, the cargo tested, the papers filed, but no answer came, because sometimes the sea does not offer an explanation, it simply absorbs. The crew of the Dei Gratia returned to their ship, the wind picked up again. The horizon remained flat, and the Mary Celeste, quiet even in rescue, drifted once more, not lost, but never quite found either. She was brought to harbor, the mystery sealed around her like fog, but at her core, she remained what she had been: wood, and sail, and memory, and from afar, she had looked ordinary. Up close, she was only empty. And within that emptiness, a story too quiet to explain. There is a comfort in answers' sharp edges, straight lines, causes followed by effects. We often seek history as a form of certainty. But sometimes, the past does not offer closure. Sometimes, it offers only silence. And in the case of the Mary Celeste, the silence is louder than the facts. After the ship was brought to Gibraltar by the Dei Gratia's crew, it was examined by maritime authorities under the Admiralty Court. Testimonies were given, logs reviewed, and cargo inspected. The ship was seaworthy. The cargo, 1701 barrels of denatured alcohol, was mostly intact, though 9 barrels were found empty. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no signs of a struggle, and so began a slow, careful passing of what could have happened, speculations not shouted, but murmured across documents, courtrooms, and newspaper pages. The first theory held that the alcohol vapor might have created a fearsome illusion of danger. Some imagined that fumes built up below deck, and Captain Briggs, believing explosion imminent, ordered an emergency evacuation to the lifeboat, temporarily. Perhaps a hatch was left open to vent the ship. Perhaps they tied a rope to trail the boat behind and intended to return. But maybe the rope snapped. Maybe the wind shifted. The Mary Celeste, under partial sail, crept away slowly but surely, leaving the lifeboat and its occupants to the mercy of an ocean without pity. No fire was ever reported. No signs of scorching found, but fear does not always wait for proof. Another theory suggested mutiny and uprising among the crew, but this, too, fell softly apart. No valuables were stolen. The cargo remained, and Briggs was known to be even-tempered, well-liked. There was no evidence of conflict. Not a dropped blade, not a broken item, only emptiness. Others speculated about piracy, perhaps by North African corsairs or opportunistic raiders in the open sea. Yet again, the facts disagreed. No theft, no plunder, no signs of boarding. The ship's papers were in order, her logbook intact. Even the chronometer remained. Pirates do not leave ships neatly behind. Some reached for natural disasters. A seaquake underwater tremor might have caused the ship to lurch, startling the crew, or perhaps a rogue wave had washed over, knocking someone overboard. In the panic, others might have followed, but the Mary Celeste showed no damage. Her lifeboat was cleanly removed, not torn away, and the ship had not been waterlogged. Others wondered about a waterspouter spinning column of ocean drawn skyward in a vortex. Such sights, if sudden, could frighten sailors into decisions they would not otherwise make, but this remains only guesswork. Still others leaned toward human fragility, panic, misjudgment, fear compounded by days at sea. Perhaps a noise in the hold, or a creak mistaken for a crack, sent rational minds toward irrational action. Perhaps a child cried, perhaps someone believed a leak was forming, and perhaps, altogether, they chose to step into the lifeboat just for a moment, just to wait. And then the waiting became too long, and the sea, as always, refused to pause. In the pages of the Gibraltar inquiry, the court wrote with reserve. No criminal act was found, no fraud proven. Yet suspicion lingered not toward those lost, but toward those who found her. The day, gracious crew, despite having acted according to law, were met with doubt. Their salvage reward was reduced. The mystery cast its shadow in all directions. Newspapers of the time speculated gently, then wildly. Stories bloomed. Fiction followed fact like ivy on stone. In 1884, Arthur Conan Doyle, then a young doctor, not yet known for Sherlock Holmes, published a short story loosely based on the Mary Celeste, renaming it The Marie Celeste. His tale involved a murderous ex-slave and exotic intrigue, and though it was fiction, many took it as truth. And so, the myth grew, tendrils curling around fact until the lines blurred entirely. But long before fiction, the facts were already ghostly. A ship found empty, a logbook that stopped mid-journey, food untouched, clothes unpacked, a child's dress folded, a kettle cooled. Not chaos, not horror, only absence. They stepped away from safety, and vanished into salt and silence. The ship had been whole, the world had been calm, and yet, they were gone. And in their place nothing, no wreckage, no lifeboat, no bones. The Mary Celeste would sail again, sold and recruited, but her name was never scrubbed clean. Sailors grew superstitious. She was considered cursed, unlucky. Years later she was run aground for insurance. Her final voyage ended not in mystery, but in fraud. And still her story returned, in the minds of readers, in the dreams of sailors, in the quiet wonder of those who know that not all puzzles are solved, not all questions have answers, and not all disappearances leave footprints. Some just float, silent and complete. It is easy to crave an answer, to reach for logic, for order. But what if the truth is simply ... incomplete? What if the moment passed in wind and error and left behind only the echo? The Mary Celeste reminds us that not all mysteries are crimes. Some are simply unremembered moments, carried out to sea, never returned. The ship was real, the people were real. Their laughter once bounced off the beams, their feet once tapped across the deck, their hands once held each other against the chill. And then, they were no longer there, and the ocean, unbothered, continued. Today, we build explanations like scaffolding sound, sensible, but not satisfying. We say it was vapor, or panic, or a missed return, but still the silence remains. The stove was cold, the food was set, and no one came back. Some mysteries are stories we cannot finish, and perhaps they were never meant to be. The sea has a strange way of remembering what the world forgets. Some ships sink and are lost entirely, swallowed by depth and time. Others survive in pieces timbers, pulled from beaches, artifacts sealed in glass, names etched on brass plaques. But then there are the ships that do not truly end, the ones that drift, long after the waves have moved on. The Mary Celeste was one such vessel. She did not go down in fire or thunder. She was not split open by reef or storm. Instead, she kept floating, kept sailing. Even after her mystery became legend, she continued quietly haunted, not by ghosts, but by questions. After being salvaged, examined, and cleared of suspicion, the Mary Celeste was eventually sold and placed back into service. She carried cargo again, under new ownership, new captains, but those who stepped aboard often felt the weight of what had come before. Whispered tales moved between ports, crews grew wary. They said the ship was cursed not because she was unlucky, but because she was unfinished. She held a story without an ending, and that unsettled those who lived by tides and maps. Her name, already warped into the more commonly known Marie Celeste through Arthur Conan Doyle's fictional story, took on a life of its own. Conan Doyle, in 1884, had written a short tale work of fiction, though many did not know. In it he imagined a sinister fate, painting a picture of betrayal and murder. His telling was compelling, dramatic, false, but it stuck. Over time, his story became entangled with the real one, and for decades, it shaped how the public remembered the Mary Celeste. She became the ghost ship, the drifting enigma, a canvas for fears, for theories, for imagination. The details of her actual history, her solid construction, her ordinary cargo, her capable captain faded beneath layers of story. She was sighted again, years later, off Haiti. By then, worn and weary, she had been sold once more. Her final captain, caught in financial ruin, loaded her with cheap cargo and deliberately ran her aground in an insurance scam. The plan failed. The wreck was exposed. And so, in quiet disgrace, the Mary Celeste ended not in fire, nor in storm, but in fraud. Her final resting place was a shallow reef, her hull battered and broken, her masts tangled in salt and sun. And yet, even that did not close her story. The name lived on, in stories told in taverns, in sea shanties hummed in low voices, in pages of mystery novels and television scripts. She became a kind of cultural echo, a symbol not of tragedy, but of uncertainty. A reminder that not all disappearances make noise. That sometimes, what unnerves us is not the violence of loss, but the absence of answers. Museums displayed models of her. Authors speculated endlessly. New theories rose, each year softer than the last, more poetic than plausible. And in this slow diffusion into culture, the Mary Celeste became more than a ship. She became an idea, a metaphor, the sense that something could be utterly intact, and yet profoundly gone. She was used to evoke loneliness, suspense, sometimes even romance. But under all those layers, the truth remained the same. One day, in 1872, a ship was found adrift in the Atlantic. No sign of struggle, no sound of alarm, only the echo of lives that had once moved through her rooms, cooked at her stove, folded children's clothes, charted stars, laughed and waited and hoped, and then nothing. No bones, no wreck, no letters, no trail. The Mary Celeste did not sink, but she disappeared all the same, and in that disappearance she gained a kind of immortality. Even now, her name conjures fog and sails, silence and speculation. The questions have outlived the facts. And maybe that is its own kind of truth. Maybe not all stories are meant to resolve. Maybe some are meant to rest gently, unanswered. Like a ship in calm water, like a page left blank, like a name that echoes but never quite returns. For you, the listener, the mystery can be a comfort, not a chill, because while they vanished, you remain. You are not at sea, you are not drifting, your feet are dry, your pillow is soft. But once, someone vanished without a sound. And now, only the story remains. A story that does not race, does not shout, does not end. A story that drifts beside you as you sleep. The sea does not remember names, but it remembers wood, and salt, and silence. While the creaking bones of old whalers braced against salted wind and the common seamen coiled themselves like rope into shared quarters heavy with mildew and murmured curses, there existed within the very same ship, sometimes only feet above or below, a world of careful quiet, of order, of deliberate velvet-lined distance. The captain's quarters, often tucked in the aft of the vessel just beneath the poop deck, formed a sanctuary not just of space but of status, of separation, a cloistered chamber away from the yawning ropes and harshness of the lower decks. Here, time moved differently. It did not shout or stammer but whispered through the swing of a polished chronometer, ticking gently beside drawn curtains and lacquered mahogany. Picture it now not as a grand estate, but a compact temple to control. Every surface served a purpose, yet no surface was bare. The writing desk was bolted, of course, and made of rich, dark wood, perhaps cherry. Perhaps imported walnut, its grain softened by the careful polish of years and the glow of oil lamps, whose flame was trimmed just so. On its surface, a logbook lay open, half filled with looping ink strokes, and beside it, a leather case for navigational tools, brass dividers, a sextant nested in felt, a small telescope no longer than a forearm. Maps were kept rolled and tied with ribbon, not string, their edges slightly curled from the salt in the air, but still elegant in the way they unfurled like silent banners of dominion over wind and tide. Along the paneled walls, narrow bookshelves held more than charts. Volumes of Homer, of the Bible, of Cicero in Latin, of English poetry, Blake, Milton, Byron shared space with atlases and celestial guides. Whether read or simply displayed, their presence implied a cultivated mind even amid the brine and gulls. A modest painting may have hung above the captain's cotter seascape, perhaps, or a portrait of a wife long absent, her cheeks pinked by sentiment or memory. Beneath it, the bed, a small but stable thing, designed not to rock too cruelly with the ship, bolstered with extra beams, its linens crisp and clean, often with lace at the edges, one pillow, maybe two, a woolen throw, a small compartment beneath two store-fresh shirts, handkerchiefs, or gloves for the rare port visit. Hanging nearby on brass hooks would be his best coat, navy blue or black, with gilt buttons and a scent of pipe tobacco barely clinging to the cuff. Boots polished but practical sat beside the bed, and at night, when all else was dark, the glow of a single lamp cast soft shadows across the joinery, making the cabin feel not like part of a ship at all, but a room suspended in a quieter world. Morning began not with a bell or order, but with the creak of footsteps on deck above, the low murmur of the first watch being relieved, and the subtle clatter of the cook preparing coffee or hot water. The captain might rise slowly, not with haste but with habit, donning a fresh cravat, washing his face in a silver basin placed on a small table by a steward who entered without knocking, whose own silence was part of the furnishings. The steward did not speak unless asked. He did not linger. His presence, like the warm bread he brought or the logbook he placed beside the teacup, was expected and invisible. Breakfast was simple but not coarse, preserved fruits, perhaps a salted egg, the crust of bread, and always tea or coffee, depending on preference and culture, while the rest of the ship roused in noise and labor, scraping barnacles or coiling ropes in the raw wind. The captain reviewed reports, studied bearings, and wrote in silence each sentence, another record of authority. Discipline aboard ship began here, but not with shouting. It was enforced by space. The walls of this cabin reminded every man where he was not permitted to go, and while the captain might dine with officers at times, sharing salted beef or fish under the low ceiling of the wardroom, he often ate alone, and when storms came, or whales breached, or sails tore loose from their rigging, he returned not to panic but to this room, his sanctum, where the charts awaited him like old companions, where decisions were made with ink, not fists. There were no hammocks here, no men sleeping shoulder to shoulder. There was only the hush of privilege. The candle that burned here was replaced before it guttered. The journal ink never froze, and even the sea, relentless as it was, knocked more gently on these walls. But it was not joy that lived here. This was not comfort in the modern sense. It was not pleasure. It was control. The captain did not laugh loudly in this room, nor did he weep. The silence was not warmth, it was the silence of responsibility, of decisions not spoken aloud, of charts spread out in the dark while others dreamed. And though his floor was dry and his supper warm, though he might hold a pipe instead of a harpoon, the weight he bore was not light. Yet outside this room, the contrast held deckhands with cracked hands, wet boots, and sleepless eyes kept the wind in the sails. And below, in cargo or mess, the world remained harsh. But here, behind this door, the lace stayed white, the paper stayed dry, and the ship moved forward not just on waves, but on quiet decisions made behind a latched door. And in that stillness, the captain, too, became a myth not of greatness or conquest, but of calm. Pressed into wood, measured in hours, sealed in oilskin, and written across maps that only he was allowed to touch. The morning does not begin with urgency. It begins with stillness. Before the deck stirs, before the groan of canvas or the sharp bark of commands, before the first salt-crusted boots strike the deck in duty, there is a moment behind the closed door of the captain's quarters where the world remains still. An untouched breath of calm held in polished brass and folded linen. The curtains are drawn but not tight. Early sun pushes through the weave of fabric in pale amber threads, brushing over the edges of the small writing desk and catching on the gentle curve of the porcelain basin. A clock ticks, but not loudly. Its rhythm is soft, consistent, and Beneath the captain's bed, the timbers creak, as they always have, not in distress, but like an old man stretching, remembering that it is morning. The cabin air is still cool, scented faintly with wax, salt, and the preserved citrus that rests in a wooden bowl atop the table. Nothing is loud, nothing is sharp. You would not call it silence, because the ship is never truly silent, but rather a kind of careful quiet that has learned not to wake its master to suddenly footsteps arrive, muted by carpet and caution. The steward knows his task well, knows how to pour water into the porcelain pitcher without splashing, how to fold the towel once more before placing it atop the basin's edge. The brass handle of the coffee pot is already warm to the touch, set down upon a coaster to keep the surface beneath from becoming stained. This is not indulgence, it is routine, expected. The ordinary elegance of life at the top of a floating hierarchy. He does not rush, he does not shout, he does not hurry to the deck. Instead, when he wakes, he sits for a moment at the edge of the bed, one foot then the other, a pause. The day has begun, but only just. The captain's garments are already laid out, pressed, brushed, arranged in a sequence dictated by habit rather than flair. The monogram on his collar is not flamboyant, merely correct. The wool of his waistcoat is not loud, but it holds its shape, and the buttons catch the morning light just enough to suggest authority without ostentation. Each layer is functional, and yet tailored. Each gesture is practiced. Even in private, he dresses like a man who may be seen. He washes with water that still holds the faint memory of warmth. The towel absorbs the moisture but leaves the scent of lavender, subtly infused from storage among herbs below deck. There is a comb for his beard, and a brush for his boots. There is a fresh journal, page, waiting, blank, expectant. While outside, sailors stretch limbs cramped from hammock sleep, while they grope for boots stiff from damp, and shift toward deckwork already grimed with salt. Here the world begins differently. The cabin is not grand by land standards, but afloat, it is a world apart. The sea chest beside the wall bears faint carvings, worn initials, perhaps his father's or his own in younger days. Inside, its contents are folded, counted, cared for. A logbook rests on the desk, bound in leather smoothed by years of use. Nearby, a drawer holds letters unsent, or perhaps never meant to be sent, correspondence that rides with him voyage to voyage, anchor to anchor. The inkstand is a gift, perhaps, its lid still dusted with the residue of past entries, waiting now for the first words of this new day. And always the ship rocks just slightly, enough to remind him he is at sea, but not enough to demand balance. He eats alone this morning, not out of choice, but because no meeting is required, and solitude, like everything else here, is part of the rhythm. The steward has left a tray, a slice of bread, warmed slightly, with butter softened and spread, coffee, strong but not bitter, a few preserved figs on a small plate edged in blue enamel. Nothing extravagant, but nothing shared. He eats with measured bites, no crumbs fall. The chair does not scrape. He writes a few lines in the logwine direction, swell, latitude, nothing more. Later there may be decisions, perhaps discipline, or course corrections. But not now. Now, the morning continues. He stands by the window more of a porthole, truly, and watches the waves without expression. He does not lean, does not sigh. He watches as one might watch a clock. He knows the sea will do as it will. His command does not extend beyond the hull, and so, he commands the hull. Below, boots strike the deck, voices murmur, the rigging clatters faintly as it's adjusted to the morning breeze. None of it demands his attention yet. He turns back to the room. He checks his compass, though he already knows its direction. He opens the drawer that holds correspondence from the shipping company, notes in a practiced hand any updates needed. There is no rush. The ship is afloat. The crew is alive. The sea has not turned. He does not rush. He does not shout. He does not hurry to the deck. And yet, each motion of his hand, each fold of his cuff, each note in the margin of the ledger is another step in command, another strand in the web of control that, thin and quiet as it may be, keeps the ship whole, keeps the world outside these walls in orbit around his quiet center. He is not idle, but he is not hurried. This is power afloat, not in violence, not in voice, but in stillness. His solitude is not loneliness, it is design, it is duty rendered calm. And the day continues. The sea outside shifts from silver to blue. The breeze stirs the edge of the curtain. The ship moves forward, slowly, deliberately, and within, the captain dresses, watches, writes, and waits. He wrote, he signed, he folded. The day began, not with a bell or a cry, not with alarm or disorder, but with the careful turning of a page. The captain sat at his desk, just after the sun had reached above the horizon line, the soft light spilling across the floorboards like a pale wash of intention. His hands moved deliberately, not slowly, but with a pace honed by repetition and responsibility. The logbook opened with a faint creak, the leather worn smooth beneath his fingers. He dipped the nib of the pen into the ink, letting a single drop fall back before writing the date with a sure hand. Wind direction, barometric estimation, sea state, latitude. The headings were the same each day, and yet each line told the unfolding story of the ship's journey, a tale of measured increments, not drama. Behind him, a small brass clock ticked, not loudly, just enough to be heard when the page turned or the quill tapped gently against the inkwell. The ink itself was kept in a velvet-lined box, nestled beside a second pen, spare nibs, and a bit of wax, all carefully arranged not for show, but for function. The clock was set to ship's time, adjusted for their current heading, not Greenwich, not the stars, but the living rhythm of their floating world. Around the desk, the cabin held maps rolled into neat tubes and labeled by hand in earlier voyages, coastlines inked by long-dead cartographers who had never sailed where this ship now floated. One map lay open, anchored at its corners with small weights. A compass, glass-covered and unshaken, sat beside it, reflecting faint golden circles in the lamplight. There were no haphazard gestures, no sudden movements. Everything, from the closing of the logbook to the sealing of the next letter to the company, carried the gravity of quiet command. He did not dictate aloud. He wrote in his own hand. A report on supplies, an update on crew health, a mention of a torn sail repaired, a subtle inquiry regarding a delayed shipment of lamp oil. The letters bore no urgency, but neither did they wander. They were composed in a neat script, ink dried before folding, wax melted, and sealed with the ship's cresta press cooled first against the edge of his own sleeve to avoid smearing. Each folded letter was placed carefully into a leather pouch that would be handed off at the next port, whenever that might be. Until then, it waited quietly, like everything else aboard. When he was done writing, he rose not with ceremony, but with awareness. The chair was pushed in, gently. The table cleared of any crumbs or marks. He stepped to the rack of maps, running his hand across the labeled tubes before selecting one. It unfurled with a faint cracking sound, not from damage but from the age of the parchment, and he laid it flat beneath his palm, comparing its lines to the morning's calculations. He did not need to speak. Outside, the first mate awaited his appearance with practiced expectation. Orders would come, but not all at once, and not shouted. The captain would step onto the quarterdeck soon, but even before he did, the tone of the day had already been set in that quiet room, with ink and wax and brass and silence. He paused beside the shelves of volumes he carried, nautical almanacs, reports from other ships, a few works of philosophy, bound in cloth and aging at the corners. He touched none of them, only letting his gaze linger, perhaps remembering something half-read or half-remembered. When he spoke, it would be to the first mate, and it would be brief. Shift the sail, he might say, or log the wind again at dusk. Not commands barked over rigging, but observations passed like weights from hand to hand, simple, precise, and understood. This was leadership by presence, not by noise. The ship did not need volume to move. It needed balance, and so, the balance was maintained. His cabin held no extravagance, and yet everything in it was curated. A decanter of water, changed each morning, not because it would spoil, but because order must be held. A pair of reading glasses rested in their case beside the logbook, though he rarely needed them before noon. A sextant hung on its peg, aligned and dusted. The walls bore no decorations save for a single oil painting, perhaps of a harbor from his youth, but even that was muted in palette, its frame darkened by salt air. The captain's command came from these details, the structure he imposed not out of pride, but necessity. He was not young, but not old. His hair was trimmed, though a streak of grey now ran along one temple. His boots were polished, not for inspection, but because dullness leads to disorder. He was not feared, but neither was he familiar. The crew knew his voice, but not his laughter, knew his silhouette, at dawn, but not his bedtime. And that was as it should be. At sea, respect is built not in volume, but in the quiet repetition of things done properly. The sails are trimmed, the food is counted, the pages are turned, and each day the captain writes, signs, folds on, the ship moves forward. Later, perhaps, he will inspect the barrels in the hold or the stores of flour, checking for mold. He will listen to the ship's carpenter describe a groaning board. He may adjust the heading by a quarter degree, but none of that begins with a shout. It begins here, in the dim light of the morning, in the hush of a room where every object has its place, where the world is contained not in grandeur but in the comfort of ritual. He did not rush. He did not shout. He did not hurry to the deck. He commanded in comfort, and from that comfort, the sea was tamed. He cut the bread. He tasted the stew. He nodded once. In the captain's quarters, where the creak of timbers underscored every moment, and the low rhythm of the sea echoed faintly beyond the paneled walls, the meal did not begin with noise. It began with quiet preparation, a cloth laid smooth across the table, its edges carefully tucked to remain unmoved by any stray draught. The porcelain, faintly tinged with blue along the rim, was arranged with exacting symmetry, each utensil aligned, each glass placed where it belonged. The captain sat at the head of the small table. The light of 2 candles caught softly in the surface of the silverware, the gentle flicker illuminating the wine in his glass but never drawing attention to itself. This was not a place for feasting. It was a space for performance, measured, precise, and defined not by excess, but by the absence of disorder. While the men below gnawed at hardtack or salted pork, their knees brushing against the damp wood of the lower decks, this space held the illusion of stability. Even on rolling seas, the wine never spilled, the butter never softened too much, and the linen remained white. Meals in the captain's quarters were a ritual of order and assertion that even here, hundreds of miles from land, diplomacy, decorum, and quiet restraint could be maintained. The captain did not dine alone, though he could have. On certain evenings, an officer might be invited, a rotation not of favoritism, but of function. A midshipman who had performed well, a visiting trader, a ship's doctor. When weather permitted, each guest entered quietly, waited for the captain to sit, and only then lowered themselves into the chairs set around the table. They did not raise their voices. They did not spill their wine. The conversation, when it happened, was sparse and ceremonial. Fair winds tomorrow, someone might offer. Indeed, the captain would reply. There were few questions, fewer declarations. The silence between statements was not uncomfortable. It was carefully cultivated, a pause long enough to feel respectful, short enough not to require explanation. At sea, noise meant instability. Quiet meant control. And so, they ate in near silence, the soundscape consisting of the soft clink of cutlery against ceramic, the occasional scrape of a chair leg, the sigh of a candle shifting in a draught. The steward, always present but never interrupting, served each course with the same practiced motion, a ladle's measured pour, a plate gently set, the wine decanted with no sound but the faintest trickle. The menu itself was both elevated and restrained, salted, cod rehydrated and stewed with onions, perhaps with a hint of spice if the stores allowed, a loaf of ship's biscuit, soaked in broth until softened beyond recognition. On better days there might be pickled vegetables, a bit of cheese, even preserved fruit. There was always coffee. There was sometimes wine. There was rarely indulgence. Everything, even pleasure, was rationed. And always, the rules held. No elbows on the table, no loud chewing, napkins folded, glasses lifted by the stem, butter passed clockwise. Toasts, when given, were brief and singular. To the ship, to safe passage, to quiet seas. The captain rarely toasted, but when he did, glasses rose with unspoken deference. This was not indulgence, it was control. The table was not a place to relax, it was a floating embassy, a small and temporary embassy of etiquette, a reminder that even here, amid the salt and the wind and the unpredictability of the ocean, civilization still breathed. It breathed through posture, through restraint, through the simple act of setting a spoon gently beside a plate, while the deckhands swayed with the waves and wrestled rigging in the cold wind, their hands stained with pitch, their bellies filled with brine-soaked biscuit. Here in the quarters, refinement held. It was not the refinement of opulence, it was the refinement of discipline. The wine might have turned slightly, the fish might have been canned a month too long, but it was served in glasses cleaned daily, on plates wiped of every speck. The performance was not for luxury, it was for identity. The captain did not demand silence. It was offered to him, not from fear, but from ritual, not from awe, but from understanding. Everyone at that table knew what it meant to eat under candlelight, while others ate in darkness. They knew the weight of a silver fork, the responsibility of white linen, the unspoken agreement that manners were more than show, they were structure. After the plates were cleared, each guest folded their napkin without instruction, without reminder. Some offered thanks with a nod, others left wordless. The steward cleared in silence. The table returned to emptiness, and the captain returned to his desk. He did not rush, he did not shout, he did not linger. The dinner had ended, as it always did, not with satisfaction, but with stillness. Outside, the ship creaked, the ropes groaned. Somewhere below, a man coughed in his hammock. But here in the captain's quarters the night progressed with the same steady pace that had begun the day. With ink and silence and the memory of a meal that never sought to satisfy hunger, only to keep the ocean at bay. The lamp dimmed, the ink dried, the sea remained. Evening on a ship like this did not arrive suddenly, but seeped in like mist through the edges of canvas and plank. By the time the last logbook was closed and the final command passed down in a whisper to the first mate, the air in the captain's quarters had begun to thicken with stillness, a kind of quiet earned not through rest, but through the practiced decrescendo of another day safely ended. The candlelight glowed low and steady, never flickering enough to distract, never bright enough to dazzle, casting slow-moving shadows across the neatly coiled ropes hung like ceremonial garlands near the cabin door, and dancing faintly on the curled corners of the maps that lay, rolled but not yet stowed, atop the walnut desk that dominated one wall of the cabin. A book lay open nearby, not for study or pleasure, but out of habit, a volume of sermons or navigation, its pages turned more by the rhythm of routine than by intention. His boots were off now, set beside the heavy sea chest, their laces loosely looped, the soles crusted faintly with salt dried from morning's deck walk, stockings thin, shirt collar loosened. The captain's silhouette moved only slightly in the warm, contained air, his figure outlined softly by the glow of one surviving lantern, its brass housing gently tarnished from years at sea. He did not speak. There was no one to speak to. The steward had long since withdrawn, having cleared the dinner service without a word, leaving behind only a single pewter mug still half filled and a cloth-wrapped parcel. The captain might or might not open before the night surrendered fully to sleep. He might write. The journal on his desk remained open, inkpot uncapped, a fresh quill trimmed, and waiting, its shaft laid with care across the page like a gate not yet passed through. Some nights, he wrote with careful precision thoughts of weather and wind, of minor concerns among the officers, of how many days since last landfall, but more often he did not. The journal remained blank, the page absorbed only silence. Instead, he watched, through the stern windows framed in heavy brass, each pane slightly warped by years of sea, ere he stared at the water, not expecting anything, not looking for whales or ships or signs, just watching the dark move. The waves, illuminated only by stars or moonlight when the sky allowed, seemed not to change, yet were always changing, curling quietly away from the hull, making their slow retreat into the wider Atlantic beyond. From time to time his gaze dropped not out of thought, but into it. He might look at the edge of the desk where the grain of the wood caught the candle's light in tiny ridges, or at his own hands now, still resting on the fabric of his trousers, the knuckles marked by years of knot tying, of logbook signing, of steering through fog. Or he might lift a small item from the corner of the desk, a locket, thin and worn, its clasp loosened from use. Inside, a miniature portrait, no larger than a coin, or perhaps a letter creased from unfolding, read often but no longer surprising. The words were familiar. He could close his eyes and see them, a date, a name, a brief reminder of someone, somewhere, not at sea. The objects in this room held meaning not because of sentimentality, but because of duration. A sextant lay nearby, its brass arms folded with deliberate care, not yet brought to the deck for the night's observations. It would be used. It always was. But not yet. Not while the air still held the last scent of bread crust and candle smoke. Not while the water lapped gently against the stern in that irregular rhythm that mimicked a lullaby too ancient to trace. Perhaps the steward would pass by once more. Perhaps not. If he did, he might bring a tune with him, a concertina played softly, its sound barely audible beneath the creaking timbers of the ship, each note hanging for a moment in the still air before dissolving like mist. But more often there was no music, only breath, only the quiet hum of presence, the knowledge that below, men slept in rows, hammocks swinging slowly in their cramped quarters, their snores weaving in and out of the timbers' complaints, while above, the captain sat alone, not sad, not elated, but suspended uncurred, not by emotion but by role. There was comfort in this, not joy, not peace, exactly, but comfort. The comfort of knowing that the sea had not changed its mind, that the wind still pushed but did not punish, that the ship remained whole, the crew accounted for, the stars visible, and that in this room, this one curated space, discipline and calm remained sovereign. He might glance again at the candle, now sinking lower, its flame beginning to flutter, the mug of water, now room temperature, the map's corner, cold, just slightly. He might remember a moment from shore, a conversation, a garden, a train of thought lost decades ago, or he might remember nothing at all. Just the sea, just the desk, just the breath. In this room, the past and present folded into each other. Nothing was urgent. Nothing was loud. The ink might dry before he wrote again. The journal might close without a line, but that was fine. The ship sailed, the men slept, the water waited, and when at last he rose, perhaps to place the book back on its shelf, or to draw the curtain tighter across the stern window, it was not to end the day. It was simply to move within it, slowly, without rush, without noise. The candle would burn low. The mug would empty. The map would be rolled and returned to its rack, and he would step toward his cot linen, already turned down, blanket folded just so, the pillow aligned beneath the carved headboard, and lie back without fanfare. His boots remained by the chest. The locket remained closed. The night did not ask questions. It only waited to be entered. Below, the ship murmured in wood and wind. The creaking, the distant splash, the sigh of sails held taut, none of it intruded. It all formed part of the room's rhythm, its architecture of quiet. No bells rang, no voices called, and as the final shadows dimmed, as the candle guttered, the silence did not deepen. It settled, it held, and still, beyond the stern glass, the sea remained. The shutters were latched, the brass hook gently resting in its worn groove, a familiar gesture done without thought, without urgency, because the wind outside was steady and the sea was in one of its quiet moods, a rhythm of slow lapping against wood, like a lullaby sung without words. The captain's charts had been folded, their creases sharp and confident, ink marks glinting faintly under the golden hush of candlelight, a last note from the day's decisions tucked away for morning eyes. His boots were placed side by side beneath the narrow bench, leather worn from decades of salt and deckboards, but polished just enough to show that even in the middle of nowhere, some standards held. The air in the cabin was warm with the faint scent of beeswax pipe smoke long cooled, and the linen of his bed, neatly turned down by a steward whose name was seldom said aloud, but who knew exactly the preferred angle of the pillow and the particular fold of the coverlet. On the wall, a brass barometer clicked softly, responding to the shifting pressure miles above their heads, an invisible reminder that time passed even in places where nothing moved quickly. Below deck, the ship creaked in its sleep. Hammocks swung gently, as men exhaled in their dreams, some clutching at imaginary rigging, some murmuring names no longer remembered back on land. The smell there was different, closer, rougher, canvas, sweat, wood tar, and boots left to dry. But here, in the captain's quarters, it was not silence in the absence of sound. It was silence made sacred, curated, intentional. He sat with a book open, unread, his eyes on a lamp's flicker, mind turning through the names of ports past, and those still to come. A letter from home lay folded in his writing desk, creased, reread, but always put away at night, as though emotion had a schedule and mustn't bleed into sleep. The room was a capsule, floating inside a larger wooden shell, itself cradled by the ocean's dark breath. Somewhere to the stern, the night watch paced, boots thudding soft as drum beats beneath a blanket of stars. No songs sung, just the occasional call of all's well, though all was never truly well, only briefly calm. He reached for a pocket watch, wound it twice, checked the time, though there was nothing urgent to time. There was no schedule the sea respected, only stars drift, and the hope that by morning, the world would still be where it was meant to be. The sea outside pressed on in all directions, unknowing, unmoved, and uncaring that this ship carried stories, men, memories, maps, and fears, that it was commanded from a room lined in leather and wool, that its orders were spoken softly, and yet obeyed without pause, that dinner had been served on porcelain, while just beyond the galley, others gnawed dry biscuit with split gums, that above the waterline, the world smelled of wax and citrus peel, but below it, the bilge held secrets too pungent for dreams. The sea held no account book, no justice, only repetition, only motion, only depth. He turned down the wick of the lamp. He listened for the scratch of the logbook closing. He stretched his legs beneath the blanket and rested his head where the embroidered pillow waited, and he did not pray, not aloud. There was no need. The rituals of command, of solitude, of enduring leadership, these were his faith. He slept in linen. Others slept in rope slings, but all, in the end, slept to the sound of waves. All, in the end, drifted, some through dreams, some through darkness, some into history. And as the candlelight thinned, and the corners of the room were swallowed in a quiet so complete it might have been mistaken for peace, the ship breathed on. The logbook would wait, the sky would turn, the sea would hold them all. And now, listener, you too are held. not by canvas sails or polished wood, but by the memory of motion, the hush of distance. The old truth that while some rose with a harpoon and others with a porcelain spoon, all were rocked by the same tide. You are not at sea. You are not surrounded by salt and darkness and tasks without end. But once, someone was. Someone folded the chart and closed the shutters and lay down beneath a sky not theirs. And they did not know what stories would be told, or forgotten. Only that night had come, and the waves, once more, would speak only in rhythm. And so now, the segment ends, not with bells, not with fear, but with comfort sewn into silence. Yet even here, in all this quiet, there is a history that will not sleep. The shutters were latched. The air inside the captain's quarters had cooled. One candle remained, flickering low on a brass holder, its wax bending, softening, folding in on itself with the patience of time. There was no urgency now, no orders to shout, no sails to trim. The maps had been rolled and tied with linen string. The compass had been covered, the logbook closed, a pen rested beside it, its tip dry, its task finished for the day. Beneath that quiet ceiling of varnished beams and slow creaking wood, the rhythm of authority slowed. He removed his boots without a sound, one hand steadying himself against the carved edge of his bunk. His coat was folded, not tossed, and his shirt unbuttoned slowly, methodically, as if each gesture was as ceremonial as it was habitual. There were no clocks demanding wakefulness, no bells to toll the hour of rest, only the soft echo of waves pressing against hull planks, steady, muted, constant. Outside, the wind had fallen to a murmur, barely tugging at the rigging. Somewhere far above, the sails still swayed gently, like sleeping lungs inhaling the last quiet of twilight. The sea had not stilled, but it had softened its surface like oil beneath the moon, silver black and endless. Below deck, most of the crew slept already, their hammocks swaying, their dreams shaped by salt, sweat, and repetition. And somewhere within the layers of oaken pitch, a fiddle lay silent, its strings stilled by the weight of evening. A tin mug rocked in its hook, a coat hung limp by the galley door. The ship was not asleep, for ships do not sleep, but it was resting, coiled within itself, breathing in silence. And the captain lay back now, hands folded across his stomach, his thoughts slow, not from fatigue but from discipline. He was used to silence, and silence did not frighten him. Silence, for him, was not emptiness, it was control, a world in which everything had its place. His cabin was a map of command charts rolled and ranked, brass tools nested in felt-lined drawers, logs numbered in order, dates precisely rendered. Here, in this private quiet, he was not away from duty, he was surrounded by it. The walls remembered every decision, every storm, every letter sent home unread. A ship was not just a vessel, it was a floating life, a self-contained orbit, and he was its center. But even so, he was also a man, and in the quiet moments when the crew no longer looked to him, when the winds no longer pulled at the sails, when even the lanterns had stopped flickering, he thought of home. A letter from his wife lay inside a drawer, folded and reread so often that the crease had softened to silk. His daughter's drawing was tucked behind a box of tobacco, barely faded, the pencil still clear. He had no need to look at them tonight. He knew them by heart. Memory served where distance did not. He was far from land, far from rooms where children laughed, far from firewood stacked near a stone hearth, far from linen sheets that did not sway. But he had chosen this life, and the sea did not surprise him anymore. It was not cruel, it was not kind, it simply was. And as he let his thoughts drift, just beneath consciousness, just beneath the weight of awareness, the ship shifted slightly, not in warning, not in alarm, but like an old friend turning over in its sleep. Outside, the stars were scattered across the sky, uncounted but not lost. The constellations would be there in the morning, ready to be measured. The sea would be there, unchanged and unmoved by whatever happened aboard. The world would not stop. It never had, it never would. But here, now, in this sliver of night, this tiny corner of wood and brass and parchment and thought, there was stillness. You, too, are still. You are not aboard a ship. You are not the captain, rising before dawn to calculate your heading. You are not the sailor, curled in a canvas sling. You are not the cook, bracing against the roll of the galley to ladle broth into wooden bowls. You are not on the open sea, and you are not adrift. But once, someone was, and once, the sea did not sleep, and once, a candle stayed lit through the longest watches of the night, burning just enough to let one man remember his position in the world, both above the deck and beneath the stars. You do not need to hold the map. You do not need to tie the knots or log the course. You do not need to keep the fire going. All of that has passed. This voyage, too, has reached its evening. The ink has dried. The orders have been written. The breath of the ship has slowed. The shutters were latched. The charts were folded. The night was long, but not loud. And now, sleep comes, not suddenly, not swiftly, but like the tide, creeping in, covering the day's footprints, smoothing every edge. He slept in linen. Others slept in rope slings, some beneath stars, some beside coals, some with salt still on their hands, but all, in the end, slept to the sound of waves. And now, so do you.